The Whipping Boy, Chapter 1, in which we observe a hair-raising event. The young prince was known here and there, and just about everywhere else, as Prince Brat. Not even black cats would cross his path. One night the king was holding a grand feast. Sneaking around behind the lords and ladies, Prince Brat tied their powdered wigs to their backs of their oak chairs. Then he hid behind a footman to wait. When the guests stood up to toast the king, their wigs came flying off. The lords clasped their bare heads as if they had been scalped. The ladies shrieked. Prince Brat, he was never called that to his face, of course, tried to keep from laughing. He clapped both hands over his mouth, but out it ripped, a cackle of ha-ha and ha-ha and he-he-he's. The king spied him, and he looked mad enough to spit ink. He gave a furious shout. "Fetch the whipping boy!" Prince Brat knew that he had nothing to fear. He had never been spanked in his life. He was a prince, and was forbidden to spank, thrash, cuff, smack, or whip a prince. A common boy was kept in the castle to be punished in his place. "Fetch the whipping boy!" The king's command traveled like an echo from guard to guard up the stone stairway to a small chamber in the drafty North Tower. As I read that page, as a writer, I noticed some interesting word choices. I like the way the king spied the prince. That was a really good use of a verb. I do like the way you could hear on the last line where it said the king's command traveled like an echo from guard to guard up the stone stairway to a small chamber. And the drafty, I like that. I like the word drafty to describe the North Tower. So on this page we do have some interesting word choice. I would like for you, as I read the remaining part of this section, for you to pay close attention to word choice of the writer as well as figurative language of the writer. An orphan boy named Jimmy, the son of a rat catcher, roused from his sleep. He had been dreaming happily as his ragged but carefree life before he had been plucked from the streets and sewers of the city to serve as royal whipping boy. The guard shook him fully awake. "On your feet, me boy." Jimmy's eyes blazed up. "Ain't I already been whipped twice today? What's the prince done now?" "Let's not keep the great folks waiting, lad." In the main hall, the king said, 20 whacks. Defiantly, biting back every yelp and cry, the whipping boy received the 20 whacks. Then the king turned to the prince, "And let that be a lesson to you." "Yes, Papa." The prince lowered his head as to appear humbled and contrite. But all the while he was feeling a growing exasperation with his whipping boy. In the tower chamber, the prince fixed him with a scowl. "You're the worst whipping boy I ever had. How come you never bawl?" "Dunno," said Jimmy with a shrug. "A whipping boy is supposed to yowl like a stuck pig. We dress you up fancy and feed you royal, don't we? It's no fun if you don't bawl." Jimmy shrugged again. He was determined never to spring a tear for the prince to gloat over. "Yelp and bellow next time. Here, or I'll tell Papa to give you back your rags and kick you back into the streets." Jimmy's spirits soared. "Much obliged, your royal awfulness," he thought. "I'll take me rags, and I'll be gone in the half blink of an eye." Chapter 2, wherein the prince cannot write his name. Jimmy could count on a thrashing first thing in the morning. Sure and certain, he thought as he pulled on his fine velvet breeches and silk stockings. The prince wouldn't know his lessons. The royal tutor was quick as a fly's water with his willow switch, and Jimmy would be back in rags. "Take a last look at me, Pa. Rest your bones," he muttered to himself. "Did you ever think I'd be holed up in the king's own castle and all rigged up in duds would shame a peacock? Reckon I'll fetch a pair of sharp-toothed ferrets and go to rat-catching, same as you, Pa." The tutor, Master Peckwitt, was a round-faced man with fat cheeks. He pointed his switch at the prince. "You fiddle-faddled scholar," he bellowed. "One day you'll be king, and you still don't know the alphabet from pig tracks." The prince snapped his fingers. "I can always get someone to read for me." "You can't so much as write your name." "Fish-posh! I can always get someone to write my name for me." The tutor's cheeks, swelling with anger, almost unhorsed the small spectacles saddling his nose. "It would be easier to educate a boiled cabbage." "Prepare to be punished, your lordship." 10 whacks at least," said the prince. "And good and hard, if you please." Jimmy, who was obliged to be close at hand for the daily lessons, reckoned that freedom was now close at hand. The prince threw him a smirking glance as Master Peckwitt raised the switch and beat the whipping boy like a carpet. That's how they would clean carpet in those days. Jimmy didn't bawl. He didn't yelp or bellow. 10 whacks, and not a sound escaped his lips. "You contrary rascal," the prince exploded. "I'm on to you, Jimmy from the streets. It's pure spite that you won't howl. Think you can cross me and get away with it? Huh! Never and no how." Gah, thought Jimmy. He's going back on his word. "And don't try to run away. I'll have you tracked down till your tongue hangs out like a red flag." So it went for more than a year. The prince learned nothing. The whipping boy learned to read, write, and do sums. Wow. So this whipping boy job is really starting to pay off for the whipping boy, Jimmy. Not so much for the prince. Chapter 3. The Runaways. On a night when the moon gazed down like an evil eye, the young prince appeared in Jimmy's chamber. "Boy, tumble out of bed. I need a manservant." Jimmy saw that the prince was wearing a black cloak and carrying a wicker basket the size of a sea chest. "What you up to now? Walking in your royal sleep, are you?" I like this page as a reader too, because the writer in the first section of the page takes us to something we call a flashback. It's hard for me to write with my finger, sorry. But flashback. He is thinking back to the time when he left his father's home to become the royal whipping boy. "I'm running away." The whipping boy sat bolt upright. Hardly a day passed that he didn't make one plan or another to run off. But a prince? What horrible new mischief was this? "You can't hop off like you was common folks. What's biting you?" said the prince. "I'm bored with dumping bullfrogs in the moat, so no one got a wink of sleep. Boring. And didn't you lie fit to kill when the knights slipped off their horses and clattered to the ground? You'd hog grease the saddles." The prince folded his arms. Boring. And don't you get me thrashed so that this hide of mine feels like the devil run me over with spikes in his shoes. Let's be off. Why me? Jimmy thought. Can't you find a friend to run off with? But no, not you, Prince Brat. You've got no friends. That's why me. Jimmy pointed to the window. It's night out, he protested. The best time, replied the prince. But ain't you afraid of the dark? Everyone knows that. You won't even sleep without a lit candle. Lies! Anyway, the moon's up, good and bright. Come on. Jimmy stared at him with dreadful astonishment. The king'll have a gory-eyed fit. Positively. He'll hunt us down. You'll get off light as a feather. But I'll be lucky if they don't whip me to the bone. More likely, I'll be hung from the gallows. Scragged for sure. You're a lookout, said the prince with a dry grin. Carry the basket, Jimmy, from the streets, and follow me. Chapter 4. Containing Hands in the Fog. The night moon had lit their way like a lantern. But by dawn, the runaways, double-mounted on a horse from the castle stable, were hopelessly lost. A thick fog had swirled in. They'd strayed from the road, and trees had closed in on them. Forest is creepy things, said Jimmy, hanging on to the basket as best he could. Gimme cobbled streets any time. A low branch almost swept them off the saddle. Boy, said the prince, get down and lead this double-headed beast. Lead it. In this fog, I'd need 2 hands and a lantern to find me own nose. But Jimmy slipped off the saddle. A plan had been tumbling about in his head. Here's your chance, Jimmy, he told himself. Slip away in the fog. Run for it. No more whippings for you. Not if you can't be found. The great sewers, Jimmy, that's the place to hide. What's keeping you? Asked the prince. Grab the halter. I'm thinking. Leaves crackled under Jimmy's feet as he began to back off. His mind was made up. Once the fog cleared, he'd find the river. Hadn't his pa taught him his way through the maze of mighty brick sewers? That's where they'd caught the fiercest rats to sell by the cageful. The dog and rat pits paid fancy prices for the best fighters, and that meant sewer rats. Who'd think to look for Jimmy under the city? Jimmy took another crackling step backward and froze. A sudden yellow glow floated in the fog. The prince burst into squawks and bellows. Who's there? Let go! Take your hands off me, you insolent rascal! There came a rough, booming reply. Well, what we got here? The glowing lantern swayed. A noisy brat on a fine beast of a horse. Jimmy edged closer. A cutthroat, he thought. Like a snake striking, a ghostly hand darted through the fog and clutched his arm. A second cutthroat. Jimmy looked up and barely made out a long, bony face with hollow cheeks and a nose like a meat cleaver. I got another Healy, cackled the second man, shoving Jimmy forward.